So I'll give you a second to turn to Psalm 87. Or scroll to Psalm 87 as it may be. You scroll down. On the holy mount stands the city he founded. The Lord loves the gates of Zion more than the dwelling places of Jacob. Glorious things of you are spoken, O city of God. Selah. Among those who know me, I mention Rahab and Babylon. Behold, Philistia and Tyre with Cush. This one was born there, they say, and of Zion it shall be said, this one and that one were born in her, for the Most High himself will establish her. The Lord records as he registers the peoples, this one was born there. Selah. Singers and dancers alike say, all my springs are in you.
Worthy of every song we could ever sing, worthy of all the praise we could ever bring, worthy of every breath we could ever breathe. We live for you. Jesus, the name above every other name. Jesus, the only one who could ever save. will build my life upon your love. It is a firm foundation. I will put my trust in you alone, and I will not be shaken. Just sit and wait for all the goodness. Hope to feel your presence. I can just stay right where I am and hope to feel you. Hope to feel something again. Hold on to who I am and never let you change me from the inside. I can be safe. I can be safe here in your arms and never leave home. Never let these walls down, but you have called me higher. You have called me deeper, and I'll go where you will lead me, Lord. You have called me higher. You have called me deeper, and I'll go where you will lead me, Lord. You're leading me. You're leading me, Lord. I can hold on to who I am and never let you change me from the inside. I can be safe. I can be safe here in your arms and never leave home. Never let these walls down, but you have called me higher. You have called me deeper, and I'll go where you will lead me, Lord. You have called me higher. You have called me deeper, and I'll go where you will lead me, Lord. You're leading me. You're leading me, Lord. I'll be yours. I'll be yours for my life. I will be yours. I will be yours for my life. I will be yours. I will be yours for my life. So let me see. I will be yours. And I will be yours for my life. So let your mercy light the path before me. You have
this holiday weekend and to have our mind on hopefully you, Father, and the things that we just feel blessed within our lives, the opportunities, the people, the experiences and the challenges, Father. We're grateful for that. We're grateful for you, and we're now as we kind of into this transition season, Father, I pray that you open our hearts, open our eyes to those people around us, Father. I just pray that as we walk outside of this place in our day-to-day life, that we do so with the story of your Son on our minds and on our hearts, and in whatever way we're able, that we can kind of share that experience with those people in our lives. We love you. We're grateful for you. And it's in you we pray.
Go ahead and take a seat. Kids can head downstairs. I think they got the varsity squad today. It's Elizabeth and Pam and Beckett. Spend a lot of time down in that basement, so they know what to do. Well, good morning, everybody. Happy Sunday. It's good to be back. I know I haven't missed a Sunday, but the holiday was a little bit of a whirlwind, and so I'm glad to be here. Let's start with this. I'm going to give you a little recap of where we've been. I promise it'll be short, because we are going someplace completely different today. Someplace completely different. From the very beginning, I've stated that I think the Psalms are a response, or many responses, 150 of them, to things that God is doing in people's lives, or things that He did, or that He has been doing, or that He will do. But God is at work, and the Psalms are a response to those. It's a response that people wrote out of their stories, things that had happened to them. We looked at David and a bunch of things that went on in his life. But there were real stories from real people. It caused them to think about real things that were a real response to what God had done and what He was doing. They are the action that people took when God was doing things in their lives. And so there's three basic maybe categories that you could put the Psalms into: orientation, disorientation, and reorientation. Been talking a little bit about the OODA loop. You observe what's going on, or what God has done, or what you've done, or what someone else has done. You orient your thinking toward what has happened. You make a decision, and you act. And so for the last several weeks, then we've been talking about orientation. Psalms that show us how things are supposed to work, the way that God had designed things, that He rightly ordered the universe. He taught us how to live in it. He took chaos and created order, right? We had the creation. We spent a lot of time in Psalm 19 over the 3 weeks, saying that by the word of His mouth and the power of His might, His words created the universe. Everything we see, everything we can't see yet, everything we'll see someday, He spoke and they were. And it gives us a place to orient ourselves. We have the Word, the Scriptures that God spoke, and those were written down and given to us so that we can be taught and we can be reproved, we can be corrected, put back in our place. They're good for training up in righteousness. And then Psalm 19 says that our reaction to those things ought to be something like repentance and humility and praise and thanksgiving. And so God has rightly oriented the universe. We observe it. Because we observe it, we make a decision and we act accordingly. And God has put everything in place, and it is the way it should be, and we walk along into our lives happily ever after. But that's where the story changes, isn't it? I warned you last week that this is going to be different. Last week, the sermon I felt like really preached itself. You're on the Sunday leading into Thanksgiving, getting ready to have the Thanksgiving dinner here, and we're talking about praise and Thanksgiving and how everything is good and right, and God did so well, and everything is well ordered, and life is fun. And And some of you may say to yourselves, or maybe even better to me, Zach, that's all well and good, but it didn't actually seem to be the case. George has been waiting for this. I'm going to knock him out. Been waiting for this for, I don't know, 60 years maybe? At least, he says. At least. That's all well and good, Zach, and I get it, and I understand, and that's what I've heard forever. But the problem is, there's a lot of times that I observe what's going on, and none of those things actually look true. Looks a lot more like chaos to me than it looks like order. It looks a lot more to me like things are disoriented and they don't work. And there is no such thing as well-oriented life. And no matter what I try to do and how well I try to do it, it doesn't seem to actually come to any fruit. Life doesn't work the way you're telling me it does. John Boyd was the Air Force colonel who developed the OODA loop that I've been talking about. And one of the things that he would teach the pilots, they were all dogfighters. Their lives were at risk, depending on how quickly they could make an accurate decision. And what he used to teach them was, it's not just about making your OODA loop work as quickly and accurately as possible. It's not just about you observing and orienting and making your decision and acting properly. It's just as important for you to disrupt your enemy's OODA loop. Right? Go back with me to 1945. President Truman decides to drop atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. They had observed everything they could about the bomb. They had oriented themselves based on the war, about the decision they were going to make. They decided to do it, and they acted. When they did, the OODA loop of the Japanese military was destroyed. They could not even observe properly what was going on because it was so different and so new and so devastating. They could not even figure out what was happening for quite some time. When you can disrupt your enemy's OODA loop, you have a huge advantage. Right? So God speaks, the world is created, everything is good, it goes from chaos to order. He puts Adam and Eve in the garden and everything's good, and it's gone from chaos to order, and everything is very good, and he gives them jobs and they start to work, and then you get to Genesis 3, right? And the serpent is there. And they've observed everything, and they're oriented to the way that God designed life. They're making their decisions, they're acting, and the serpent says, well, yeah, but is that really the way it works? One little wrench is all it took. Eve sort of re-observes. You know, wait a minute. Maybe, is that what he really said? Did God really say we should die? No. You're not going to die. Not like drop dead die. He's trying to pull the wool over your eyes. He disrupted the OODA loop that they had in place, that God had set in place. And immediately, when they made their decision, they took action, disorientation. Everywhere. Right? We're naked. Somebody finds some clothes. No, it's his fault. No, it's her fault. No, it's his fault. Where are you guys at? Hiding. The whole thing falls apart. The whole thing falls apart. And the problem for us is, this actually happens pretty regularly. Right? Every single one of you have stories about this. I'm not going to stand up here and start naming any of them. But we have disorientation. It comes upon us. It's a surprise. Sometimes it's our own fault. Sometimes it's somebody else's fault. Sometimes it's nobody's fault. You know, when I read the Psalms and it starts talking about enemies, one of my enemies, I don't want to say my favorite enemy because that's definitely not what it is. My nemesis, maybe. David will be in a cave and he'll be crying out against his enemies. And I try to imagine a physical representation of the law of entropy. You guys know the law of entropy? Second law of thermodynamics. If you do not apply energy and effort to a thing, it tends toward decay. Right? It breaks. All the stupid plastic clips that hold my car together, every single one of them, every time I try to do anything, and a plastic clip breaks. That is my enemy, the law of entropy, because life doesn't work right. I hate those plastic clips. Why plastic? Law of entropy. Sin entered the world in the garden. I don't think we can underestimate how much it broke. I mean, it broke everything. My back doesn't work the way that it's supposed to, that it did before. I got a lot of comments today already about having my beard trimmed. You know why? Because the law of entropy. Because half of it's gray now, and it didn't used to be. That's my enemy. It's not the way it's supposed to work. But it's the way it works now. Because we had chaos, and God turned it into order. And by the power of his voice, he gave us his word, and he gave us creation, but it was broken. And 1 Corinthians 15, which I think many of you know is my favorite chapter of the entire Bible, one of the reasons it is because it says very clearly that Jesus is going to destroy every enemy. All of them. And that includes the law of entropy as far as I'm concerned. But it also is death. He says, in fact, that death will be the final enemy to be defeated. I think that the way he's going to defeat death is to raise us all back to life, the way he raised the Lord Jesus Christ. But in the meantime, we got problems. Right? That is hope. And we will win, and I'll come back, and there will be no more entropy left. Go read 1 Corinthians 15. It's a good chapter. What was buried, what was sown in dishonor will be raised in honor. What was buried corruptible of entropy will be raised incorruptible. It will be defeated. But in the meantime, though, things don't always feel right. They don't look like they're going right. We can sit down and reason and observe what's going on around us, and we reason that things aren't right. So it's busted. The fact of the matter really, and I know that I'm a little bit of a pessimist, but the fact of the matter is that not only is everything broken, and we are still in the midst of a fight, but in the meantime, I think, honestly, often, things are pretty bad. Not pretty good. Pretty bad. Right? I've been some places where you walk up to somebody and say, "Don't worry, it's okay, let me read Psalm 1 to you." They'll say, "What planet are you from? Have you seen anything that's going on here?" Let me tell you a little bit about Israel's story before we get to our psalm for today. I'm gonna finish, I think, with the psalm because it is it's a little bit devastating. Think back through Israel's story. We did the creation. We have Adam and Eve in the garden. We have sin from the serpent. We know everything just descends into chaos immediately from there, right? The next thing that happens, the next story, creation, people in the garden, sin enters, murder. Right? Like it decomposes very rapidly. But eventually God makes a covenant with Abraham. He says, "Look, here's the way I'm going to fix all this. I'm going to pick one guy, and I'm going to make a mighty nation out of him, and I'm going to re-bless everybody on the whole planet because of this one guy. That one guy is Abraham." You think about the Israelite existence. All those years with Jacob, with Joseph in Egypt. All of Israel ends up in Egypt, enslaved for 400 years, and then Moses arrives. They have the Exodus. They emerge triumphantly, and God had made a promise that he was going to give them the land, right? The promised land. not hard to sort out. Moses takes him into the wilderness, and of course, what's the first thing they do? They disobey because, well, things are still kind of a little bit chaotic. So they end up stuck there for 40 years. And just as they're getting ready to enter into the promised land, God says, all right, here's what I'm going to do. I got to remind everybody of all of this one more time. So he takes Moses and he gives him a sermon. Moses is standing there. He's not going to go into the promised land, but he gives him a sermon. He says, look, you got two choices in front of you. Blessings and curses. On the one side, if you obey the covenant, if you do what I ask, you're my chosen people, and I've made you these promises, then everything's going to go well for you. And then on the other hand, there's the curses. You're my chosen people, and I've made you promises. But if you don't hold up your end of the deal, it is not going to go well for you. You are not going to like the consequences. But they enter into the promised land. Joshua takes them through the conquest, and they take over much of the land, and each tribe is given their allotted space, and they move into those places. But they didn't quite finish the job, because there was still some chaos along the way. And then you have somewhere in the neighborhood of 490 years, which is mostly marked by disobedience. Right? There's some bright spots along the way. David sort of has some of his. There's some blemishes also. Josiah is a nice little bright spot. 400 years into the entire experiment, maybe even a little bit longer. The whole thing, though, is sort of marked by a little bit of disobedience. And God decides to send a message. Sends the Assyrians. One of the things that had happened because of chaos, because of not obeying the covenant, because of not doing things right, there was a northern kingdom and a southern kingdom. All of Israel was supposed to be one place with 12 tribes with one king whose name was God. They decided they wanted their own king. That didn't go so well. David held everything together for a little while, expanded the kingdom. Solomon came along. That was a good time. But then immediately after Solomon died, they had the temple built, and it's chaos for a long, long time. Because sin is everywhere, and it wrecks everything. So finally, in about 722 BC, the Assyrian army comes in and wipes out all of the northern kingdom of Israel. 10 tribes, gone. Packed away, loaded everybody up, shipped them off to other places in the Assyrian kingdom, burnt a bunch of stuff down, all of the bad things that you can imagine and think of. But there was still the southern kingdom, the kingdom of Judah. That's where Jerusalem was, that's where the temple was. And they felt like they were doing a pretty good job because God had packed away the Assyrians. And the Assyrians had even tried to take over Jerusalem. They tried to ransack it, they tried to knock over the temple. But through some supernatural intervention and a little bit of quick thinking, that plan was thwarted. So the southern kingdom of Israel then was sort of hanging on for a while. Well, one of the things that people started to think about during that time was, if God has taken 10 of the tribes of Israel and scattered them all over the Assyrian Empire, then is his promise still true? The promise was that all of Israel would be together living in the promised land. And each of the 12 tribes would have their 12 places, and God would protect them. But people started to wonder if that was actually the case or not, because most of Israel was gone, and it definitely didn't look like they'd been protected. But then Judah sort of decided, well, maybe since we're still here and we have the temple and we're doing things right, maybe we're the real chosen ones. Maybe those guys, they didn't do what the covenant said, and so God is punishing them just like he said he would, but we're sort of the ones who got it under control. You have a whole list of prophets in the Old Testament that lay claim to the fact that that is not true. One of those is Jeremiah. If you're ever really, 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 really down in the dumps, and you've got like a couple weeks on your Pick up Jeremiah. He will be a comfort to you. He had a difficult life, to say the very least. But one of the things that he was tasked with was telling the southern kingdom of Judah that God was coming for them, that there was no hope that they could turn him back, that they were going to be exiled as well, just like the northern kingdom, and that it was not going to be good. No one listened to him. No one repented. Nobody wanted to hear any of it. And so finally, based on what he had seen in the siege of Jerusalem, starting in about 586 BC or so, Jeremiah wrote a book called Lamentations. Now, if you're ever really, really, really down in the dumps, and all you got is like an hour or an afternoon, you read Lamentations. These are some of those things that it's not easy to preach. It's not easy to preach a lot of these texts. There's a pretty good reason. Did anybody raise your hand if you've ever heard a sermon series on Lamentations? There's a reason for that. There's a reason for that. I'm sure it's been done. Yeah, there's lots of guys that have done it, but I can tell you why. It's a lot more fun to stand up and say, hey, well, guess how many times the psalm says the word praise? Guess how many times it says to write a new song? Let's all think of something to be thankful for. That's a lot more fun than reading this. Lamentations, chapter 2, starting in verse 19. Some of Jeremiah's observances, things that he was watching as he reoriented himself to the reality of what God was doing to his people. Arise, cry out in the night, at the beginning of the night watches. Pour out your heart like water before the presence of the Lord. Lift your hands to him for the lives of your children who faint for hunger at the head of every street. Having your city be laid siege in like 586 BC, not a pleasant situation. These sieges would often last multiple years. Right? Take the power and the intensity of the atomic bombs in 1945 and think to yourself, well, if the best weapon that you had on hand was like a catapult, and you had to destroy a city whose walls were 15 feet thick, what do? Well, what you do is you take your entire army, you encircle the entire city so that no food or people or often water could get in or out, right? When you got a year and you got 25,000 troops, you build a dam. Stop water from getting into the city. The people in these times, especially the siege situation, the three things you would die of are dehydration, starvation, and disease. Right? Often disease. Because in circumstances like this, you get sick and die before you can find a way to starve to death. Cities would have a lot of food, but as soon as you can't get any more in from outside, eventually you start to starve. And so what an army would do is they'd circle this entire city, and they would wait. They had all the supplies. They weren't losing any troops. You could just sit out there and eat from the fields. Right? The cities weren't large enough. You couldn't build walls so large around all of your farmland that that would be inside the city with you. They were unprotected. So armies would take your food, they'd take your water, you couldn't get in, you couldn't get out, and then they'd sit and wait until you decided you had enough. Lift your hands to him for the lives of your children who faint for hunger at the head of every street. Look, O Lord, and see with whom you have dealt thus. Should women eat the fruit of their womb, the children of their tender care? Should priests and prophets be killed in the sanctuaries of the Lord? In the dust of the streets lie the young and old. My young women and young men have fallen by the sword. You have killed them in the day of your anger, slaughtering without pity. You summoned as if to a festival day my terrors on every side. And on the day of the anger of the Lord, no one escaped or survived. To those whom I held and raised, my enemy destroyed. I don't think there's a way, I don't really want to, that's not to be shocking necessarily, but it is to say that the Bible didn't pull a lot of punches in places like this. We have some pretty good records of what happened in the siege of Jerusalem, and none of it is good. None of it. It was awful. And there were people, Israelites, inside the city, debating what they were going to do about their children who were starving and dying around them, saying to themselves, if this is the promised land, and this is what it looks like to be God's people, then what am I going to do next? Right? They are observing a new set of circumstances around them. They're trying to orient themselves to those circumstances, and it isn't working. It isn't working at all, because they don't see what's happening. They see what's happening in front of them, but it doesn't make sense. It doesn't compute based on the old orientation. So finally, in 586, some people decided they had enough. The Babylonian army invaded the city, took everybody there that was left, and packed them off to various places, mostly though to Babylon. They destroyed the temple, burned the whole thing down. Remember that the temple was the place where God dwells, right? So everyone's dead or exiled. The city of Jerusalem is gone. The temple, God's presence with his people, gone. The northern part of Israel is nowhere to be found for the last 150 years. Everybody is being hauled off to another place, and everyone who is still alive is thinking to themselves, what does God do? How does this make sense? If this is the promise, and this is what it means to be his people, then what do we do next? Some of the people fled, obviously. Some people ran. Many of them ran to the land of the Edomites. Edom is a place that it's the descendants of Esau. Right? So if you remember back to Jacob and Esau, all of the people who went down Jacob's line, all of his descendants are Israelites. His name was changed to Israel. He had the 12 sons, and that's the nation of Israel. Everyone who descended from Esau were then called the Edomites. And they're sort of related, but sort of not, and they kind of had some contention, and so they were sort of buddies, but sort of not, and they were family, but kind of not. And if you read the book of Obadiah, you're really down in the dumps, and you want to see some vengeance for your enemies, and you got a little bit of time, go read Obadiah. It's only one chapter, but it's worth a read, because here's what happens. In the book of Obadiah, we get the understanding that as Jewish Israelites, as Judeans were escaping Babylon, or escaping Jerusalem, on their way to wherever they could go that wasn't Babylon, they went to Edom to hide. The Edomites said, yes, good. We see what's happening, we will protect you. And they were brought into the Edomite cities and the Edomite houses, and they were hiding there. And the Edomites then went to the Babylonians and said, hey, if you're looking for any others, we got them. Come on over and pick them up. And so the Babylonians went into Edom, and they found the rest of the Israelites who were running away and hiding in what they thought was a friend's house, and they were arrested and taken to Babylon. that brings us to today's psalm. It's a long way to go to set the table, and I realize that. It's a historian that I like to listen to sometimes. He's got a line on the steel. He says that many of the people who listen to him say that he's addicted to context. He wants to do a 1-hour podcast. It takes him 6 hours to do it because he's... But if you don't know the story, these words will not make any sense. This is Psalm 137. By the waters of Babylon, there we sat down and wept when we remembered Zion. On the willows there we hung up our lyres. For the captors required of us a song, and our tormentors mirth, saying, "Sing us one of the songs of Zion." How shall we sing the Lord's song in a foreign land? Up to this point, we're talking about the Psalms of orientation and praise and of thanksgiving, and sing a new song, bring out the harp, and bring out the lyre, get everything with strings, and let's play a song for God. And the Babylonians said, "Hey, we know you guys play songs. We see all the harps. Play us one of your songs that you love to sing." They're not going to sing "How Lovely Is Your Dwelling Place," right? They're captured. They're prisoners of war, hauled off from the promised land with no temple and no presence of God, it seems, with them at all. They hang up their instruments because they're not going to sing. Sitting by the waters of Babylon, crying. How shall we sing the Lord's song in the foreign land? If I forget you, O Jerusalem, let my right hand forget its skill. Let my tongue stick to the roof of my mouth if I do not remember you, if I do not set Jerusalem above my highest joy. Remember, O Lord, against the Edomites, the day of Jerusalem, how they said, lay it bare, down to its foundations. O daughter of Babylon, doomed to be destroyed, blessed shall he be who repays you with what you have done to us. And here's the big one. Blessed shall he be who takes you little ones and dashes them against a rock. What sort of thing has happened to a believer in God who prays this prayer? Siege of Jerusalem. That's the sort of thing that happens. When they look at all of their kids who have died in a siege of their city, and they're packed away, out of the promised land, with no hope, and God is gone, and his presence isn't there, and his promise doesn't seem to work, what do you do? What's your decision? How do you act? And in the midst of disorientation, in the very midst of having the whole loop destroyed and not understanding what's going on, but seeing nothing but torment and destruction and suffering, the prayer is, these are my enemies, and you give them what they deserve. Pay them back for what they did to us. And some of us think, and we go, wait a minute. We're about love your enemies. We're about pray for those who persecute you. And I say, yes, absolutely. But I also say this. I think it's possible that when Jesus says, cast your cares on me, one of the things he might mean is, tell me what they are. He knows it's in your heart. He knows what you're thinking. If this is the way you sort of process through things. Now, understand that people who are thinking this way maybe are people like Daniel, right? Like Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego. People who were looking, Daniel was a young man at this time, right? And he was taken in the first wave because he was sort of young and smart, and there's all sort of political things that go on. And so you take the guys you can educate first, and there's a lot of things going on there. But imagine Daniel hearing the stories of what happened to his people at the siege of Jerusalem. and what his response would be. What do we do? Sometimes I wonder if casting our cares on Christ simply means, look, I don't know what else to tell you right now, Jesus, at this particular point, other than I kind of like to see these guys dead. I kind of like to see these guys get what they deserve. Psalm 4:4 says this, be angry and do not sin. Ponder in your own hearts on your beds and be silent. Selah. Maybe, just maybe, in disorientation, one of the best things we could do is not run from God, but simply to be honest with Him. Not to act yet, to do anything really stupid. Don't sin. They're not going to go run out and start a war here. That's not what happens. They're not running around killing people's kids. Okay? But as they are observing and starting to reorient, they pray to their God and they say, I don't get it. I'm confused. I'm angry. This doesn't make sense. What are you going to do about it? And I think that's an okay place to start. Disorientation introduces us to our enemies. We've been reading several books on Psalms, and Eugene Peterson, who's one of my favorites, says that God is the primary subject of the Psalms, but enemies are established in solid second place. Solid second place. The word enemies is used 55 times in 39 different Psalms. Enemy is used another 22 times in 17 Psalms. The word foe, 24 times in 20 Psalms. Foes, 8 more times. Adversary or adversaries are another 8 times. In 150 Psalms, someone or something is named an enemy, an adversary, or a foe 117 times. Psalms are called war. Psalms are the first place you take action against your enemies. And there's a really good case, I think, to be made that a lot of what happened to Jerusalem was partially their own fault. God had warned them. You've been told, keep the covenant. Because if you don't, it's going to be bad. If you're down in the dumps one day and you got a few hours, go back and read Deuteronomy 32. Sit and think about that for a minute. The blessings that God promises to give are about 15 verses, I think. The curses take up another 50. They are laid out. He tells them what he's going to do. But as we look forward into some of these other Psalms, this is maybe one of the hardest because of verse 9. The understanding that the desperation was so strong that the prayer of this psalm wanted to bless the people who were destroying other people's kids. There are others. There are other difficult psalms. And we're going to take a look at some of them. As we go into the next couple of weeks, though, the question is going to be this. Psalm 133, at least part of the blame can be laid at the Israelite people. But what about when you become disoriented because something's happened in your life or something's happened in someone else's life, and it's not your fault? It's not their fault. It might not be anybody's fault, except for sin, or maybe the law of entry, which I hate. What do we do then? How do we respond when we are so disoriented and confused about things that aren't even our own fault? They're happening to us, they're happening to our family, they're happening to our friends. Let's pray. Father, there's a piece of me that just can't help but being hopeful. Even as a bit of a pessimist, that I always know that we have the wind locked up. We have the hammer at the end. Everything's going to be defeated. Every enemy, every stand, death itself, and you will reign victorious. That the present suffering is not worth comparing to the joy that's going to be revealed to us. But in the meantime, Father, the suffering is often so real. It is so devastating. It is so confusing. My prayer for the next few weeks is simply this. I know that your Psalms give us some places to help. They give us words to say. They give us a language that we can pray to you in times when we are so disoriented. We don't know which way is up. Our enemy has observed, and they've oriented, and they've decided, and they've acted, and we can't even observe what's happening. What do we do then? Father, I know that your word has advice for us. It has psalms for us. It has ways for us to pray that are in this book because it's things that people have done, it's ways that they pray, the ways that I think will be blessed. But Father, also, please help us not to sin. Help us not to sin. And help us as we move forward to look at these difficult songs. Amen.
So it's Advent. let's do a Christmas song.
This is called reorientation. Nice job, Lisa.
I'll text you this week.
Yeah, I had the phone sort of stashed away for a little bit, so I don't even know if you were trying to figure out what I was doing, but. So that's called reorientation. We will get there, and it's a really good day. So, a couple announcements real quick. The craft fair. She has the name craft fair.
I'm just here to take over. So, the craft is going to happen this week. I don't know where to put it. So
But if we could move all the chairs out of the sanctuary again to,
Just the side.
okay, just the sides, that would be great. Also, we cannot set up the tables yet because we have a lot of downstairs yet. Also, if we could have the long tables brought upstairs, not the round ones, and put maybe along the hallway or in the baby nursery, but don't squish the babies, that would be great as well. And also, please, if you have donations, we need those, right? I'm starting to panic that we're not going to have anything, which is never the case. It's why the book of James and I have a contentious relationship. But Linda will be here at 9 a.m. on Thursday. I'll be here also later on into the evening as well. If you have things that you would like to donate, please either talk to Linda or I. If you can't be here on Thursday but need to give things and have a key or whatever, still talk to us. We'll figure out a way to get that here. You can just maybe put it in the back there. That would be awesome. Seems like there's another thing, but yes, please, we need your things. We need, and Lois.
Yes, at 11 o'clock, the grandmas will start serving downstairs cornbread and chili for a donation that will all go to them. There may be some cookies, brownies.
Yes, and I sort of feel I dropped the ball on advertising for that, so I apologize. Next year I'll be better about it. But yes, if you bring people or have people or you're inviting people, we will have cornbread and chili on Friday. I think we'll have pho maybe on Saturday from Brody, who's donating that as well. So there will be lunch for donation as well downstairs. So yeah, thank you everyone for, I already know it's going to be a success. I just panicked. But thank you everyone for all that you do, from moving chairs, to donating, to praying for us, for supporting my daughter and the girls. So, yeah.
I don't think there's anything to add to that. Anything else anybody would like to announce? Yes,
Okay,
Linda.
just a little bit about the craft fair. This is the week to finish up your projects, to make baked goods, and to start guilting your family and friends into being here. Yes. Bribe them, threaten them, whatever it takes. Let's have a really good turnout.
Yeah, the biggest need is turning in.
This last word is what needs to be said to get them here.
Yeah. The biggest need is changing from making things to getting people here to buy things.
Yes.
Sounds good. Anybody else? Did your grandma's birthday? Is that happy birthday?
Happy birthday to Sam Whitley.
Sam Whitley.
He's a young 88, if I'm allowed to say. It's too late now.
If you were wondering who, if you aren't sure, haven't met him before, a couple years ago for the craft fair, he was the one who made all of the cars and garages, and then he was also donated all the wooden toys, the tractors and everything one year to the She Has a Name craft fair as well. I'm sure everybody saw those. So Mr. Whitley is the one who made all of those for us, and they were wonderful.
All right, Father, thank you again for another day. And I know it's funny to have a Christmas song after a sermon like that, but Father, we truly do know you sent your Son here to become one of us. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us. He died for us so that we could die with him. He raised from the grave so that we could live with him. And that is the end of the story. It always has been, and it will be. And no matter what else happens in between, we get the win. Father, we look forward to it with him. Amen.
Amen.